Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us in this conversation that we recorded at the end of May 2021. My guest here is Barbara de Micheli, and I'm very excited. Thank you very much, Barbara, for joining. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Agnes, for invitation. I'm very happy to be here.
Maybe I'll just introduce you quickly, Barbara, if you would like to then add something. So, you are the head of the Social Justice Department at the Fondazione Giacomo Brodolini, which is based in Italy but is working internationally, especially at the European level. You have designed the Master in Gender Equity, Equality and Diversity Management that you started coordinating in 2012. So, we will be speaking a little bit about all these 11 or 12 editions of the Master. You're a senior researcher and project manager. You have over 20 years of experience in workplace, in gender equality, in inclusion, social justice, very relevant and very interesting topics. So maybe tell our audience, our listeners, a little bit more about the Fondazione Giacomo Brodolini and your role and where do you see your role heading?
Yes, thank you for the question. Fondazione Giacomo Brodolini is a research center. It exists since 1971. It started with the studies on industrial relation and how work organizations are evolving. And it continued in the last years with a stronger focus on social inclusion, gender equality, and more recently, diversity and inclusion. And also it works on different kinds of innovation in how works evolves. We have our main seat in Rome, but we also have a seat in Brussels, and we mainly work as a research services provider to different agencies of the European Commission, like the Fundamental Rights Agency, like EIGE, or like Eurofound, and also for the DGs themselves. So we do research, and a lot of like directives of legislative papers have been based on study that the Fondazione has made. In this context, I coordinate this social justice unit whose focus is mainly on gender equality, social inclusion, and industrial relation. And we are a team of 10 people, and we do either research, training, and also a little bit of consulting activities with organizations and companies.
I also have to say, for the benefit of the audience, but also just to reiterate that, with the Work Life Hub have been cooperating with the Fondazione Giacomo Brodolini. I think there's a great synergy between our organizations, not at all in a competitive spirit, but very complementary, I think, and it has always been a pleasure and an honor to be working with you, Barbara, and your team. And maybe we'll talk a little bit later on what we are cooperating on now. But before we do that, I would like to tap into your expertise on diversity and inclusion specifically, both in your capacity as a researcher, as a consultant, but also as the coordinator of the Master in Diversity and Inclusion that you've been organizing since 2012. So, what do you see? What are the most pressing diversity and inclusion issues that organizations have to face now and deal with currently?
Well, the first thing to say is that when we started in 2012, diversity and inclusion, or diversity management, as we used to say, was like a nice thing to have, something on top, but companies did not consider it as a main important issue or something strategic to be implemented. Now it's something that companies consider strategical, and this is the reason why there is a growing attention on towards gender, towards diversity and inclusion in all its forms. We have a strong experience on gender equality, and I think there is still a need to work on gender equality. Although a lot has been done on this, most of the companies have programs, mentoring, initiatives. Some of them have quotas, but still it's a big issue and it's not solved. We have been working very recently on a study on the Gender Pay Gap Transparency Directive, and the numbers, the figures that come up are quite shocking, although the European Commission is working on gender equality since the late 70s. So gender equality is still a priority. LGBT people in companies, so their well-being in company is very important. Also, the relation between different generations is crucial. And I also think, from the perspective of some countries, like for instance Italy, what we call multicultural or even racial integration is really something that is going to explode in the next year. And then, of course, there is the issue of disability, which is changing completely in the perspective. We recently have a teacher in our master that said, if we are lucky, we are all going to become people with some kind of disabilities. So disability is not a condition given from birth, but is something that all of us are going to experience, at least the lucky ones that are going to live very longer. So all these are very important. But I think that one of the most important thing is that the approach to all of these needs to be more integrated. So, of course, all of these dimensions have specificities and require a specific way to be dealt with. But at the same time, most innovative companies are those that have a strategic and holistic approach to inclusion. So, to changing the workplace to make it an inclusive space for everyone, uh, giving the possibility to each of us to express his or her own diversities.
Yes, I really liked how you framed it in going from the nice to have to the must have and the strategic aspect. Because I think early on, um, organizations try to tick the box of diversity hiring or just putting in place something. But when a lot of research has been done now into this, because time has passed already, and with hindsight we can see that a lot of, or at least some of these initiatives haven't really brought out the potential of diversity and inclusion that that was the reason why they were already put in place. So it's not just diversity and inclusion policies or initiatives for the sake of diversity, but it's to really contribute to innovation, to more creativity, retention, uh, thinking outside of the box, thinking with the eyes of the customers. So this potential has to be exploited, and I think that's why it's so important what you say, framing it into this strategic way.
Yeah, I mean, according to what you are saying, for instance, studies have underlined how a very important element for creativity and innovation is what they call informational diversity. So that people that, according to their different background, bring to the group different information and ways of seeing things, and this is very powerful. It might be a little bit more difficult to manage groups that are not uniform, that have differences. You have to acquire skills to do so, but at the same time the potential, as you were saying, is much higher, not only because you have different information in the room, but also because everyone makes higher efforts to make his or her own thought more understandable for the group, because they are aware they are not speaking to people that share their same background. And this is an exercise that really empowers the possibility of the group to reach some kind of results.
And always taking the work the organization is doing to the next level.
Exactly, exactly, yes.
So, of course, Barbara, we cannot ignore that we're recording this conversation in May 2021, hopefully at the tail end of the pandemic, but we're not out of the woods yet. In the meantime, some research have already looked at the impact of the pandemic on, let's say, for example, the achievement of gender equality policies and initiatives and the role of women, but also more equal caring or sharing between men and women and other workplace initiatives. I think a little bit similar to what happened after the last recession and the measure and the austerity measures a little bit. But then also yesterday was the first anniversary of the death of George Floyd, or the Black Lives Movement. climate issues. So there's a lot going on in the world. And I just wanted to ask your take about how do you think some of these current events are impacting uh, D&I in organizations? Will they amplify perhaps the need for better and more effective D&I management? Will this increase the appetite for diversity and inclusion initiatives in organizations? What is your feeling? What do you think of this?
Well, I think that, as you were saying, there are a lot of inputs from the outside world and also that circulate very quickly due also to the social media. And also something that happens far away from us has the possibility to impact what is going on in our company. And so some uh, exigencies to defend rights, to be more equitable, are very strong, and you cannot ignore them. So companies are asked to do so. At the same time, the pandemic has changed strongly the way we are working. I mean, for those of us who have luckily maintained the work, because there is also a lot of people that lost it, um, work is not as it was before. Everything is very different. And I think that managers all over the world are struggling to find a way to deal with teams that are hybrid in the sense that partly work from home, partly work from the office, and are made of people with very different exigencies. So I think that yes, there will be a stronger need for diversity and inclusion practices because the risk is that you lose people. You lose people because not everyone is reacting at the same time, at the same way towards the change that the pandemic is bringing. It's a matter of means in general, so not everyone has the same means, but it's also a matter of, I don't like very much the word resilience, but at the same time, it's a matter of how much resilience you have in dealing with new things. And also, I think that a reflection on the fact that one size of leadership, of management doesn't fit all, but you need to take into account that the people are different because they have different gendered roles, they have different environment in which they live, needs to be taken. No? During the pandemic, we all came very familiar to our colleagues' house. In some cases, no, it's true. We didn't know where they were living in some cases, no? And you could see that the context where people live is very different. Also, in terms of access to space, possibility to have a place to work calmly and isolated from other things going around. So I think that this is a reflection that needs to be done. Not everyone is the same and not everyone has the same access to resources. Uh, the pandemic is enhancing these differences among people, no? And I think that we will all be asked to take an action towards this.
I also I really like what you just what you summarized here, and I think for me it can be really summarized up with vulnerability. Somehow, this ideal worker outfit that we all used to put on when we went to the office, it was much easier to pretend to be the kind of worker our employer wanted us to be when it was all Zoom and MS Teams, and you could see everything. It was a different story, and I think probably that's what we needed in becoming more aware of our differences, becoming more aware of our vulnerabilities, to really focus even more on the inclusion and the belonging and the empathy part, and not just the checking the boxes.
Yeah, also because I mean, what happens when you are obliged because the working environment is not inclusive to hide some part of you? This is something that, at the long run, has a very negative effect on yourself, on your well-being, but also on the organization, no? Because you are not participating as you are, but you are always using a lot of energy to pretend to be someone else. And when you are working under the stress of a pandemic, this might be too much. So I think that this is the reason why there is all these focus on inclusive leadership, on ways to make the environment where you work more inclusive, more fitting to individual exigencies. And also, the pandemic has shown that it is possible to work from remote. It's not needed to go to work, in a physical office every day, but this needs to be balanced with the other individual exigencies. And this has to do with diversity and inclusion because individual exigencies are not all the same.
Yeah, and I think flexibility, variety, all of this, needs to be really pushed much more, much more.
This needs to be pushed much more in terms of action, so initiatives, and also in terms of way of thinking, language, way of relating to other colleagues. So that's why I was talking about a systemic approach now, because you need to reshape in a way the way of thinking to welcome not only on paper but in the concrete daily life what's going on, and to make some behavior possible.
I could really, if I can draw a parallel, it's like the same awakening I think has happened around well-being at work. And if when well-being used to be just a one day a year event, for organizations, when they would have a salad bar or they would have a sports something, they really understood that this needs to be embedded into everything they do if they would like to maintain the health and productivity and engagement of the employees. And it's the same with the D&I.
Yeah, what we are seeing is that we are in a way in a new era, no? The era of communication is still very strong, but companies and almost employees ask for actions. So it's not just the Diversity Inclusion Day, as you were saying, or the Pride, or the Kids at Works event, which are nice. It's important because it gets the attention to the issue, but then it's what happens every day. And to do this, you need more competences, no? Because when you stay at the level of just communication or a very general commitment, it can be done only on the base of empathy, or people that are sensitive to some issue or some others. But when you need to plan a change, then you need to have some specific competences to do this.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Italian master in diversity and inclusion, gender equality, that you have initiated and coordinated within the Fondazione Giacomo Brodolini in Italy since 2012. Maybe just give a little bit of context to our listeners and audience in terms of the numbers of people who have been trained, and a little bit maybe the framework of the course. So this is not just a one-day course; it's a longer time investment and learning event for participants. And then my second question would be, what are your lessons learned in terms of how the needs of the participants have evolved, and what they can get from such a course that they could really use in their everyday work.
So, as for your first question, I designed a course which initially, or for the first 9 edition, was a physical course over the weekend. It was 10 weekends, Friday and Sunday and Saturday all day, and it was combining theory from academic teachers. The Fondazione has a wide network of academics, so we had this high level theory together with presentation from practitioners, so consultants, the ones that go in company and support the implementation of the actions, and also a strong part of project work. So from the very beginning, our students had the possibility to learn about the background um, in a academic way, because what we noticed is that sometimes people that work as consultants lack of the strong background that a lot of these teams have. They have no idea of, for instance, of the movements of the past, of the all the theoretical studies that have been done on gender equality, on the definitions of disabilities, these kind of things. And we thought it is important to have. I mean, perhaps you will not use it, but it is very important that you know that these things that do not come from the scratch and that they have a strong history behind. So we decided to combine theory, practice, and project work. And we decided from the very beginning to have classes in which people could bring their diversity. So we included students, people coming from the university, but also people that were working on the field, like in gender equality bodies or the first diversity committees, so that they could be together and exchange the perspective of experience with a more fresh theory. They stayed together for 10 weekends and they worked together with in order to create this project work in the end. The project work was like how would you implement an activity to bring diversity and inclusion in one of the dimensions to life. So it could be very different things. And during these 10 weekends, these students met from 30 to 40 teacher testimonials and trainers. So this was an opportunity for them to enlarge their network. At this stage, I mean, up to the 11th edition, which is going to be closed at the end of June, we have trained 250 people, more or less. And some of these people are now in the diversity inclusion bodies in most of the most important Italian companies. So they have been trained and now they operate. Um, and then, of course, in March 2020, we find out that we could not do it physical. We used to do it physical in Rome. So people from all parts of Italy came and stayed over the weekend and stayed together and had this opportunity to dedicate the weekend to diversity inclusion. In March 2020, it was not possible anymore, so we decided to go online. So the 10th and the 11th editions are online, and we try to maintain the same structure. And what we have learned from this experience is that students learn a lot from the trainers, but they learn a lot also from each other. And that this formula, so 10 weekends, it's important because every one of us needs time to reflect. I mean, what we teach, what we share is something that needs to be needs to become something that is part of any individuals. No, you need to become critical, to face your own resistances, to share with the group why you agree or why you do not agree. In our teams, we had people with different perspectives, so we also had conflicts, differences, and this was very important because people learn how to listen and how to answer and how to create an inclusive place. Because, of course, when you are welcoming differences, you are introducing conflict, and you need to find a way to manage the conflict so that you can go the step behind. So this was very important. And also what we noticed in these 10 years is that this is a field where words change. So we named 10 years ago the master diversity management. Now we talk about diversity and inclusion. We talked about gender equality. Now we talk about gender equity. So it's an evolution, and the use of words is very important in this field because words express the way you think. And so we think that in 3 months, our students, in a way, learn and share a new language as well.
That's great. And I love the way you framed it also, that without conflict there is no growth. It's the same everywhere, and I think that's a bit of an uncomfortable truth, that if you would like to develop your organization, if you would like to develop yourself, reflect on you, understand your own bias, and maybe be confronted with the viewpoints of others who think differently than you, then there is some kind of discomfort or even conflict, as you say, and how you manage the conflict and how you frame the conflict as an opportunity for growth is, I think, an important aspect to this. And then that's how you can go further and further. And we see this in a number of companies, for instance, Barilla or others, who have had a crisis because of the way things were managed, but have come out of it stronger and better because the conflict or the crisis was an opportunity to take stock and to reflect and to understand that, okay, maybe we were stuck in some old ways of thinking and doing, which no longer serve us, no longer serve our employees, no longer serve our clients, and we need to look forward.
Yeah. Also, we think that in a way, diversity and inclusion agents are bridges among different groups or groups of stakeholders. So to do this, you need to be able to find the right words to express your opinions, and also not to be too aggressive, because when you are too aggressive, people, even if you are right, I mean, even if in your defense of your rights you are right, people react to aggression with even more resistance. So we think that this is something that is not explicitly taught in the master, but is part of the experience, because people from different contexts stay together in a safe place, which is the classroom, and they learn from each other.
Now, maybe it's time for us to reveal that we together are coming out with an offer, which is a European level advanced training course on diversity and inclusion to help participants learn about and implement projects to create inclusive and safe and diverse workplaces in Europe. And the idea is to really take the course and your experience to a European level. Now, Barbara, why do you think, uh, or what is the key arguments why we feel that there's really a need to have such a course at the European level?
Well, first, because we believe in the European project, and we think that there is a European dimension that is still very lively, and that our diversity and inclusion managers need to consider. We think that people coming or living in different countries could learn from each other on what is going on in the countries in terms of practices, idea to manage diversity and inclusion. We also had a specific request from some companies we work with, because they have diversity and inclusion managers at European level area or North European level, and so they would like to reflect on programs, actions that could be adopted in the whole area and not just for a single country. And also because the last answer would be that the European Union has been pushing a lot in the last years in the way of recognizing rights, promoting, for instance, gender equality, new ways of seeing disability, LGBT people rights. So we think that there is a European framework of initiative, legislation, programs that would be very nice to know and very nice to learn from in order to implement actions also at country level.
Absolutely, and we see the incredible mobility of goods and capital and with the growing integration between European countries, this is an area that also has to be addressed at the European level, because there's so much richness actually in the different experiences, and it would be a shame not to use that for organizations, for employers, both in the public sector and the private sector, to learn from each other, bridging, I think, a little bit the cultural or the linguistic barriers that exist maybe between countries. And also, I think a lot of this information cannot be found. There isn't really, there's a lot of research, sometimes often hidden behind, paid journal articles, but there isn't really a European one place of information where you can go and understand what is this Polish small company in the manufacturing, sector doing about Roma integration, for example, or this great example from this French company that is including these people with disabilities, or that other company that is recruiting, really focusing on recruiting cognitive people with cognitive differences, and even people on the autism spectrum for their new jobs. So I think that there's really a need to have a place which is one place where you will have access to all of these rich experiences, but also lessons learned and maybe mistakes, so that you can have a very European relevant experience, which is, I think, an added value compared to just a domestic or maybe a regional experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Europe has the word diversity in its claim, no? I mean, so I think that diversity it's for sure a problem for Europe, but it's also a good and big resource, no? And I think that it's in a way the moment to give value to this to the richness that come from diversity in terms of practices, in terms of ideas, and also in terms of possibilities for companies and organizations. Yes, for sure, for sure.
And I think it's another aspect that, after the pandemic, the talent shortage, and it's not, it hasn't gone away. Once we come out of it, it will be even more important for organizations to attract and hire and retain the right diverse talent if they would like to succeed and stay relevant. So I think we're a little bit in a fog. So this is a good time to invest in learning and exchange of experience, because once the fog is lifted, we'll see a new reality, as you say, in terms of remote work, in terms of diversity, in terms of talent shortage. So we have to be ready to face this.
Absolutely, and also because the most innovative companies already work with no borders in Europe, no? So this is something that needs to be taken as a value, and to do this, you need to know more about what's happening in the different countries, and at the same time see what the different companies do in their context. I mean, we are aware that for when it comes to diversity and inclusion, there are some legislative constraints which are different from countries, but we think that focusing on the bigger European framework and the specificity of the actions in company would be very interesting. Also because, I mean, what we know about diversity and inclusion, it comes a lot from the US approach, but we know that there are different way of doing it in different European countries. So it would be very important for people coming from the different contexts to share and to make a reflection, as you were saying, in a place where they could also together perhaps define new practice, define new strategies, and confront. So I mean, I'm very curious about the final project works that will come from our European advanced course and see what's come up. No, it would be very interesting.
Absolutely. Now, the course is going to start at the end of October, on the weekend of the 22nd of October 2021. Maybe tell listeners, Barbara, who this course is for, and what are they going to get from the 12 weeks they participate in the course?
Well, we thought that as we did in the Italian edition, we would like to have a group that is not completely homogeneous. No, so we are thinking about HR people, but also people from top management in companies, people that want to put in practice diversity and inclusion and are in the position in their companies or organization to do so. The 12th weekend will be organized with a double approach. On one side, we will keep some weekends dedicated to some of the dimensions, but we will make even more stronger the systemic approach. So we will try to give to our students tools and methodologies to assess the diversity and inclusion needs and to elaborate actions that could be integrated in the intersectional approach to consider all the different dimensions. We will also focus on the impact, how to measure or how to collect information and data for the impact. And we will also keep this approach that we had in the Italian edition to combine theory, so academic theory, with consultants' experience and with the part dedicated to project work.
I also would say that I think one of the strengths of this course is also the combined network of the Fondazione Giacomo Brodolini and the Work Life Hub, and the kind of guest lecturers and companies we will be able to invite, which really are household names, some of them, but some of them even, maybe smaller organizations and companies that you wouldn't find on the internet, but those that have really pioneered or developed some very outstanding practices that they would like to share and explain how they have conquered these challenges, how they have implemented. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel I think this has changed in the past years, maybe. But before it was always the Googles and the Facebook, always the same companies who were invited to speak about these issues. Maybe this was part of a PR type of work, but also if we know that European economy is made up, I think, 99% of small and medium-sized companies, also lots of even smaller micro companies. So one of the focus is definitely to try to give realistic examples and accessible examples for people, future D&I managers and future D&I champions who are working not in one of the top Fortune 500 companies in Europe or the biggest companies listed in European Stock Exchange, but definitely regional organizations, but who still have a very strong drive and interest in creating inclusive and safe and diverse workplaces.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the elements, and the other is to acquire or transfer to the people participating to the master, to the training course, to have planification skills, no? To make diversity and inclusion plans and to be strategic about that. Because something that is lacking is to have a comprehensive view and a view which is we are doing diversity and inclusion initiatives to make our employees feel better. So it's not just diversity and inclusion for the purpose of diversity and inclusion, but as you were saying before, to have a better environment, a better place for everyone. So on this, you are right. Often small companies do very interesting things. They are pioneers, and they need to be supported to communicate, express, put together the dots, and make a plan. And on the other side, bigger companies sometimes need to be more active in collecting data, measuring impact, and seeing if the initiatives that they are doing are really bringing towards the company towards a more inclusive environment.
That's great. Thank you. Now, coming to the last question of our conversation, Barbara, if I could ask you, based on the wealth of experience that you have, but just to distill it and give one piece of advice to future D&I leaders on how they can build inclusive and safe and diverse workplaces, what would be your key advice, the most important thing you would like to highlight?
Well, first, to collect information about your people, collect data, listen to people needs, ask them, and do not plan initiatives without listening to them. So co-create initiatives that include people that you are trying to make an inclusive workplace for. And perhaps if I had to say just one thing, don't give things for granted, because everyone has his own bias and stereotypes. And sometimes listening to what people say, even if you may don't like what you hear, could be a starting point for changing.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you very much for this very interesting conversation, Barbara. I'm sure listeners took away a lot of your insight and knowledge. For me, every time we talk, there's always something new, there's always something that triggers a new thought process. So I really appreciated you coming on this conversation. And I'm looking forward to, the first sessions together for the European level advanced course on diversity and inclusion.
So goodbye to everybody.